President Cullinan, Board of Trustees, Eastern Washington University, Kathy and I want to thank you. When I received the phone call a few months ago to invited me to give this commencement address, I accepted readily, and I didn't have any idea that these honors were in the works. We don't feel deserving, but thank you. Today is a particularly meaningful event for us because Eastern blood runs through many veins in our families. My sister went to Eastern. Kathy's aunt and uncle attended Eastern. Her mother received her master's degree from Eastern. Her father earned both his bachelor's and master's degrees from Eastern. Back then it was known as Cheney Normal. We are proud of how Eastern has educated us. The reason we're here this morning, though, is because of you, men and women, soon to be graduates of Eastern Washington University, the class of 2017 from the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences and Social Work. Yeah. And the College of Business and Public Administration. I'm very honored to be speaking to you today, and I know you grads are happy to be here, but there are some that are much happier than you, I am sure. You've heard about it, your parents, maybe your employers, your spouses, your children, other family members, maybe your dog and your cat that comforted you during finals weeks. I suspect it'll be a great Father's Day for many dads here. I have heard that many of you are going to be moving back home. I hope you've told your parents. Graduates, it's now your turn. How about a big hand for those that helped you? Now, I've seen a lot of vets stand up today. We have had 11 newly commissioned lieutenants from the Army's, from Eastern's ROTC program commissioned just yesterday. They are going to be departing shortly to serve us and our nation. Please give them a round of applause. And when I first came here, this really didn't exist, but right down the parking strip there was a place called the Spokane Coliseum, and that was a half a century ago. And I was a sixth grader at Sheraton Elementary, and at least one of my classmates is here today. Sheraton's on the eastern edge of Spokane, and we came here to the Spokane Coliseum to square dance. I'm not kidding you. Some of the grandparents probably remember that. It wasn't optional for us. Square dancing was part of the physical education curriculum in grade schools at that time. And so one day in 1959, the floor in the predecessor of the arena was packed with sixth graders square dancing, including my future wife. I didn't know her then. She was attending Hutton Elementary. Now I can still remember square dancing calls like Alaman left, do-sa-do. I really don't want to demean square dancers, but not many of us had smiles on our faces. I hated every minute of it. And that's the last time I square danced. But the last time that I was in the Spokane Coliseum was in 1965. That was when Kathy and I were attending Lewis and Clark High School. Hope you got some LC grads here. We were high school sweethearts. We had been going together for 2 years. We've been together ever since then, except for a while at Eastern when she dumped me. And I gotta admit, I deserved it. So You see, when I graduated from LC, I was really rocking. I had a 3.8 GPA. I'd been a starter on LC's championship football team. I'd gone to state as Spokane's champion pole vaulter. I was an officer in the student council. I arrived at Eastern with a small scholarship and lots of promise. And then I moved into an apartment in downtown Cheney that was above Bill's Tavern. I hear somebody probably heard of that. Well, back in 1965, a glass of beer was a quarter. If you brought in a gallon jug, Bill would fill it up for $1. And you might have guessed I had an okay time. By the end of my first quarter at Eastern, all that promise from LC was gone, and my GPA had plummeted to 1.9. I was on academic probation. The scholarship soon disappeared, and that was the first step toward Kathy dumping me for a while. Now, let me say, I wholeheartedly congratulate those of you that are graduating with honors at the top of your class. But I share this confession because I suspect a few of you have been to Bill's and are graduating below your potential. If that's true, then enjoy a sigh of relief, because I stand here as proof there's hope. And yes, you too can rise above that GPA, and it's all on you now. You got to get yourself together. Today, you grads become part of the extended family of Eastern Washington University. Blood runs through you, through your veins, and you're going to meet a lot of Eastern Eagle grads in the years ahead. My wife, Kathy, has worked in a dozen states across our nation and also overseas when we were in the military. And her specialty, as you heard, was speech pathology. And all of her jobs, she worked beside Eastern grads, all of them. And she always said they were the best. When I was a brigade commander in the Army, there were 3 battalion commanders that were working with me. 2 of those 3 were Eastern grads. One also became a 2-star general. As a freshman at Eastern, I pledged a brotherhood that became the Zeta Nu chapter of Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity. That fraternity no longer exists at Eastern, but the brotherhood most definitely does. Every month in Spokane and also across the state around Seattle, Pike brothers gather for lunch. Friendships continue after 50 years. And so I tell you that a degree in friendships from Eastern Washington University is a very big deal. Now, I don't have any silver bullets for you today about your lives and careers, but I do have a few suggestions. The first is this, and it's probably more warranted after this past week. I suspect many of you get up in the morning and hold your head and think the world is going nuts. You know, many issues surround us today, but there have been many big issues in every decade of my life, and even more so in the lives of my parents and grandparents. You probably don't know much about the 1960s. When I was here at Eastern, that decade and the early 70s were tough years. And I'm going to refresh your memories momentarily here, briefly. We lost President Kennedy. We lost his brother Bobby. We lost Martin Luther King. Our country supported a ridiculous invasion of Cuba, which failed miserably. We were on the brink of real nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Fallout shelters were the rage. There were lots of protest marches. Some turned violent. There were race riots. There were shootings. There were church burnings. Drugs flowed freely. There was a very divisive war underway, and 58,000 Americans lost their lives. Now, my first deployment was not to Vietnam. It was to Washington, D.C. because of riots against that war. I was a first lieutenant at the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I found myself facing angry citizens with different views in our nation's capital. I was very uneasy. And then in the 1970s, our military fired on and killed students at Kent State University. Then our vice president resigned, and then our president resigned, it seemed like all hell was breaking loose. But in the midst of it all, we Americans went to the moon. We went to the moon. And you know what? Us students in the 1960s, we enjoyed the greatest music ever. It was a wonderful time, too. So we do have many challenges ahead, but we're going to get through them as well. Our country needs all of us to be good citizens, to be informed, to vote during elections, maybe get more involved, and very importantly, to be respectful and civil towards each other. Only about half of Americans vote. And that is not the way to influence anything. So my first suggestion is I challenge you to raise those numbers. Now, some of you might have jobs already. The rest of you are going to get jobs. It would be unusual if you weren't a little anxious about all that right now. Having to get up before noon, no more classes to skip, pressures of working day after day, long hours, week after week, and wow, after today, just you and your performance stand between paychecks and promotion. I suspect some of you are getting the jitters. Well, let me calm your nerves if that's true. And I know you're a lot of Mariners fans out here, and I like the Mariners as well, but in my heart, I'm a New York Yankees fan. Yeah, I sense a few Red Sox fans are out there. I started liking the Yanks right here in Spokane when I was a kid. Anyway, the Yanks had this famous shortstop who just retired. His name's Derek Jeter. He was a class act. He retired from baseball 2 years ago. Everybody expects him to be a first-round pick into the Hall of Fame. It might surprise you to learn that Jeter's, and I'm going to quote, biggest fear in life was being unprepared. That's a pretty remarkable thing coming from Derek Jeter. I mentioned Jeter because it might not mean anything if I told you that was true with me. But it really does matter. I cannot tell you how many times I have looked myself in the mirror in the morning and reminded myself how darn stupid I was. There's many times that Kathy would look at me and she says, "You don't need the damn mirror." But since leaving Eastern in 1969, I've had about 24 jobs, and you know what? I never felt prepared for a single one of them. Not the first one nor the last, and so I always found myself boning up on things, often on my own and sometimes in classrooms, and I hope you'll do the same. It's a good thing. Let me tell you what's not a good thing. I came across some very disturbing data recently. I discovered that somewhere between 25 and 40% of college grads today will never read another book, hard copy or digital. Now that little tidbit really surprised me. You know, I actually know a few people who don't read books. And you know what? It's pretty noticeable. I simply refuse to think that the same is true for you Eastern grads. I hope you don't fall into that category. But if you do, there is a tiny bit of good news, because you won't have to ever face me as a prospective employer, because I'd never hire you if you didn't read books. So, everybody's heard of Bill Gates. He often said that reading taught him to see things differently. He also said, and I quote, "You don't really start getting old until you stop reading." Now, that should scare you right back into a book. Which leads me to my final suggestion for you today. Most of us Americans work very hard. I would say that we work too hard. Employers give us vacation time. less than half of us use all of our vacation time. I urge you to cut yourself some slack in years ahead and take your time off. You'll earn it, you'll work hard, but you know the only thing you really need to fear is that your company flourishes when you're gone. That would not be a good sign. And since we Americans don't take our vacation time, many of us just don't travel, especially outside of North America to the rest of the world. And yet many of us think we understand everything about every place. Just so you know, I'm not blowing smoke. Statistics from the National Travel and Tourism Office reveal that in 2015, less than 13 Americans traveled to Europe, less than 5 million to Asia. Combined, that's less than 5% of our population of 320 million. I challenge you this morning to raise those numbers. It will absolutely alter your perspective on many things. There is something that bores into you and changes you when you walk fields around Gettysburg or the Little Bighorn, or stare down at Machu Picchu, or sit on the bank of the Jordan River, or stand in the shadows of Dachau. This year, my high school sweetheart and I turned the ripe age of 70. Instead of a big party, we are flying to France and walking across the Camino de Santiago. Perhaps you've heard of the Camino. People have been walking it for centuries, about 500 miles, just the two of us, with backpacks, hostels, and hopefully a whole lot of wine. I wish I had done this when I was much younger. I am now hoping to survive and reach the age of 71. 20, 30, 40 years from now, you guys will be thinking about things you want to do and how little time remains. Don't wait. Use that vacation time and expand your horizons. One of my all-time favorite quotations comes from Henry David Thoreau in his famous book, Walden. Thoreau was a guy back in Massachusetts in the 1800s who went to live by a pond. You might have heard of him. He marched to a little different drum. Here is how Thoreau explained why he went to the woods. I went to the woods because I wished to live life deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came time to die, discover that I had not lived. I cannot imagine a worse feeling than that. This quotation I love. It has guided me for decades. To live life to the fullest, however much time I have, wherever I go, whatever I do. Graduates, I encourage you to find your own woods. Be good citizens. Continue learning. Follow your dreams into new places. When you get to my age, you won't be disappointed. Eastern Washington class of 2017, the future awaits. I congratulate you and wish you the very best. Thank you.